Hello and welcome back. Well, I've had this wood lathe for just over a year now, and I've got to say it's a brilliant lathe and it's been running really well. I'm very happy with it. Now, out of the box, the lathe does not come with a chuck, although I did buy several chucks for the lathe, and this is what the chuck looks like here. It just screws onto the spindle there like that. Now, when you buy a chuck, you don't actually get a chuck spanner. So that's a optional extra that you have to buy. And you know me, why buy one when you can make one? So I made this spanner here out of 5mm steel plate. And you can see it was made in a rush because it's just been cut out with the angle grinder and it's not very pretty, but it does still work. And it fits on the nut at the back, and you use it to tighten the chuck up and to loosen it off. And that's important because if you wind it on by hand and you don't nip it up with the spanner, if you get a catch, then the chuck will get wound onto that spindle a lot tighter and you'll have trouble getting it off. Now, as I said, this spanner is made from 5mm steel. It is not very comfortable with the handle the way it is, so I'm going to build one a lot better than this. It'll be thicker steel and it will have a better, more ergonomic handle on it. And that's what today's video is about. I have this big piece of flat steel. I think it was from a dentist chair or some sort of dentist equipment. Anyway, it's 8mm thick, so that will work really good for this chuck spanner. Now I want to make the spanner just a little bit longer than this one here, and I think this area here will be a good place to cut out the piece that we need. I draw out a rectangle for where we need to cut, then it's off to the angle grinder with a cut-off wheel, and I cut out that piece. Now I haven't cut out the handle because I want to hold this in the vise of the milling machine, and having it parallel will be best for that. Just a quick warning, the next part of the video is a bit shaky. They're building a house next door and I think they're compacting the drive, so the vibrations are coming right through into the garage. Anyway, I've drawn a centre line down here, and I need to cut an opening of 38mm here to take the nut. Now this nut is a bit wider than the lines, and that's because I'm going to cut them out with an angle grinder. And I'll also need to cut a V in the back here somehow. I cut down the sides and also cut some angles in and nibble away at it until I can get most of this material out. Then I come in with the grinding wheel to get it back into those corners. Now I'm set up in the milling machine and I mill out evenly on each side until I get to the finished size. Then I check the nut in there and that fits in quite nicely. Off camera I milled the little V in the back there as best as I could, and then I finished that off with a file. The nut fits in there like that and it looks pretty good. So I'm happy with that. The next step is to start cutting out the handle. So I've got to take a big chunk out of each side. And I use the angle grinder with a cut-off wheel for that. Then it's over to the belt grinder to tidy it all up. I round off some of the sharp corners there. And also make sure there's no burrs on the handle there. I use a flat disc to take the paint off the rest of the handle. This here is a piece of Fijian mahogany. It is a very strong wood, so that'll be really good for the handle. The next step is to draw a line down the centre, and I also need to cut it off a bit past the end of the handle there. So I'll draw those lines up properly off camera. And then we're over to the bandsaw and I cut out that centerpiece. I carefully trim it all up so that it's nice and flat at the bottom there as well. Then that piece is cut off to length. I've made sure that the handle fits in the groove, and I've put this little round bit in, and there's a little divot in there so that when I go to put this in, I'll be able to line that up into the center. The next step is to wrap up the block of wood. Epoxy resin will find its way out of the tiniest crack, so we need to make sure that this is wrapped up really well. And in this case, I put on a couple of layers of this masking tape. I decided to drill 3 holes in the handle as well, and this will allow the epoxy resin to go through the holes and hold nice and strong. I also countersunk those holes as well. I've never done epoxy resin, so I'm down at the Woodturners Club, and my friend Ken has bought all his epoxy resin gear in, and he's talking me through how to mix it all up. So this is 2 to 1. Part A, you put in twice as much as part B, so we're just measuring the weight there, and then we halve the weight and then add it on, and that's what we need as a target for part B. Then you give it a good old stir, and I don't know if Ken was joking or not, but he made me stir this for a very long time. Once it was all stirred up, then Ken came along and worked out how much colour we need. We're using a nice blue, and then again we stir that for ages. You want to get in to the sides and just make sure everything's mixed up properly. Then it's time to pour it into the piece of wood. I really should have used the stick here. If I used the stick, it would have ran down the stick straight into the hole. Although I didn't make much of a mess here, so there's no problems. I sort of aimed a little bit over half, and then the spanner would go in there. I don't get to the bottom and it starts to overflow, so I need to tip a little bit back into the container. Once that's down, you can see I get the center point in the right location. Now, as the air bubbles come out, you need to keep topping it up. And that's pretty much it for the epoxy resin, so it's quite simple. It's been a few days and the resin has gone rock solid hard. Now, I mentioned that the level will go down once the air bubbles come to the surface, and you can see here that the resin did go down a little bit. But that's okay, we'll just turn back this end a little bit until we get to where the resin is. Now I know these chucks are not made for this, but this is pretty solid, so it's not going to fly out. I use the tool rest here to make sure that I have it in the center, and then we tighten it up and we're ready to turn. It's a little bit hairy to start with because I'm cutting through a lot of this green tape. But once you get down a little bit, you start seeing the shape of the handle. And this is looking pretty good. I use a small spindle gouge to round this end off as far as I can go with the tailstock still in the way. At the other end, I cut off the bits that were not filled up with resin. So there's one on this side and one on the other side. Then I sand the handle and I go through all the grits from 80 to 400. It's nice and smooth. This is an abrasive compound. This really makes the grain and the resin pop. That abrasive is worked in and then it is wiped off. Lastly, I use some beeswax as a finish. We use the same process here. We work it into the wood and then I turn the paper towel over and we wipe it out. You can see there that it's turned out brilliant. I've removed the tailstock and I'm cleaning up the end here. I do the same process with the abrasive and the wax to finish off the handle. Now that the handle is finished, I work on the metal part. I'm cleaning this off with acetone. You may have seen this before in some of my other videos. This is cold bluing. So basically it reacts with the steel and it turns the steel black, which provides some protection against rust. I clean off that solution with water. I thoroughly dry the metal part and then I apply an oil coating. This is the spanner in action. Chuck gets screwed on and then we nip it up, and that just stops it getting bound on if you have a catch. Here are some stills of the chuck spanner. This spanner will be a lot easier to use than the last one I had. It was a great little project. I hope everyone has a great day, and once again, thanks for watching.